So welcome everybody, and we're happy to have you all here to kick off our World HPP Day Wellness webinar, and we're really excited to bring this program to you. This idea was actually conceived by the Softbones team after feedback from many of you who've attended our national patient meeting and have been to some of our previous mental and emotional health wellness activities, and we're thrilled to be able to come together on World HPP Day to bring this webinar to you. So just a few housekeeping things before we get started. Next slide. So all attendees need to be muted for the presentation is to reduce background noise. So just a quick Zoom lesson, if you move your mouse, there should be kind of a control dashboard that pops up at the bottom of your screen. If you go to the left-hand side, you'll see a microphone and it should say mute. Go ahead and click that to mute yourself. And then we'll need you to unmute it a little bit later in the presentation, and we'll tell you when you can do that. This is an interactive presentation, and we have some polls and some voting opportunities in the middle. So make sure you have your cell phone handy. We'll talk about how to do that. Or there's also an option for you to vote or participate in the polls through the web. So there will be a link that is sent to you at the appropriate time in the presentation through the chat window. So keep an eye again on that dashboard at the bottom of your screen. There's another little a conversation box that pops up that says chat, and you will see a link in which you can vote there as well. And at the end of the presentation, we are going to have appropriate attendees automatically would be directed into breakout rooms. You don't have to do anything. You'll just be moved directly into another little breakout session. And we're going to continue the discussion in smaller groups within our regions to help to really underscore the support that we can give each other, and also to identify any gaps or any additional support that we as Softbones can either provide through some of our resources or additional materials or webinars like this. Our agenda for today is going to kick things off shortly, and we'll spend the first half hour speaking with Dr. Jen Hartstein. And then from 2:30 to 2:45, we're going to have a Q&A session. And then at 2:45, you'll be whisked away into your breakout rooms. And we'll leave those breakout rooms open until about 3:15 before we shut them down and end the presentation. During any time of the presentation, feel free to submit a Q&A through the chat window again at the bottom of your screen. You can just type your question right in there. And also, if you have any technical difficulties, feel free to also enter it in the chat window. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce to you Dr. Jen Hartstein. Many of you may know her. She's been on the Today Show, Dr. Oz, tons of broadcasts around the world. She's a world-renowned psychologist and a personal friend of mine. And I'm really thrilled to have her here to talk about living in our world today, which brings us its own set of emotional stressors, but also the complications of living with a chronic and a rare disease, and some of the emotional and mental components that come along with that. So Jen, I'm going to kick things over to you and let you take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Deb. Yeah, it is. Thank you all for having me. And thanks, Deb, for asking me to be part of this. It's really an honor to be here and talking with everyone. So I'm going to start with a general question. And although you can't necessarily answer me directly, we're going to throw up a poll question. And my question to everybody is, how are you doing? Okay. And so as Deb said, you can text this in. So here's a way to text this in, or in the chat, there will be a link. And kind of thinking about your last 2 weeks, you can think of more if you would like, text in any feeling you've been experiencing over the last couple weeks. Like, I really am asking genuinely, how are you doing? And since I can't ask you that in person, we're going to ask you about this way. And when the results come in, we're going to show everybody what that looks like. And there's a reason I'm asking this question of everybody. And as you guys text, I'm going to keep talking because I know we have to be mindful of time. The reason I'm asking this question is because very often this is a blow off question, right? I walk by someone, I say, how you doing? They say, great. I say, so great, glad to hear it. And we keep walking. But what we need to start to think about, especially when we're dealing with being a person with a chronic medical illness or a person who cares for someone with a chronic medical illness, we need to be aware of our mental health. And our mental health is fueled by how we feel, what experiences of emotions we're having, what we're noticing in all of that. So today we're really going to talk about kind of what mental health is, how it differs from mental illness, um, kind of how stress and burnout impact us and are similar and are different, and what you can do about it. And so we're going to kind of push all that information in a short amount of time, but we're going to get through it. So we start with just recognizing and noticing how we're feeling. So we know, right, that HPP is a chronic medical condition, and we know that it exists on a continuum. So I want you to start to think about mental health as also existing on the same kind of continuum. All right. So all of us have mental health. And when there is a medical condition, it's going to impact our mental health. It's just, there's no way around that. And that's going to impact the person who has the disorder. It's going to impact the people around the person who has the disorder. So everybody's going to be impacted in some way by our, kind of physically and mentally. So let's define what mental health is. So mental health is our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It's the combination of all of those things. And it affects how we think, how we feel, how we act, how we interact with other people, and also determines how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and how we make choices. So just think about that. That's your mental health. Your mental health is the thing that kind of is like leading the charge in how you deal with the world every day. So that's going to have a direct correlation and a direct impact on our physical health. So if we're already having some physical health compromise and there's some issues there, and then we're not stopping to take care of our mental health, we can expect that, and research shows this, that our physical health will be impacted when we do not take care of our mental health. We want both things to be working together. So there are some commonalities for people who are living with a chronic illness. This is a little different than the caregiver. We're going to talk about them too. But for those living with a chronic illness, there is an increased risk for symptoms of depression and anxiety, right? Because like that would make sense. It's common to feel sad or frustrated due to limitations you might have because of an illness, or it's common to be anxious about trying something new or having to engage in something new, or it's common to feel a sense of loss if you can't do the same things as other people. So all of those things are kind of swirling inside, but we just kind of push them aside very often because we're so busy focusing on the physical part of our lives and the medical part of our lives that we kind of take the mental health stuff and put it on a shelf. This is one of the bad things about mental health is there's still so much stigma around it. It's not just part of our everyday conversation. One of the great things about having soft bones is having a community which can really work with you. And we know that community, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but community is a huge protective factor in all of this stuff. So the thing is, we all have feelings, right? Everybody has them. Many of us might like to ignore them, but the truth is we all have them. So we have to recognize that it's not an issue to be experiencing emotion, right? We are all going to have it. It's all going to happen. But not all feelings mean that we have a mental health issue or we have a mental health or that we have a mental illness, right? So feelings don't automatically equate to mental illness. Otherwise, everybody would have some sort of diagnosis. So we want to remember that mental health, something we all have, it does not equate to mental illness, which is something that only some people have, because by nature, mental health and mental illness are diametrically opposed, right? Health and illness are not the same. So we want to remember that on this continuum, all of us might be experiencing feelings while some might meet diagnosis for a mental illness in general. All right. So we have to remember that this continuum is present and we have to recognize that it's there. So we want to think about what other feelings might we, in this cloud that we're creating. I'm sure there is a range of feelings for everybody. And what a lot of research shows is people dealing with chronic medical conditions not only experience anxiety and depression, but they might experience fear and guilt and resentment and frustration and excitement and hope. It bounces back and forth. It shifts and it changes. And there's going to be a lot of experience of emotion for many of us. So all of these emotions are going to impact how we live every day, how our relationships happen, how we have a relationship with ourselves, how we have a relationship with other. And we want to remember not to jump to the worst case scenario, which is very easy when we're already living kind of in that anxious space. So we want to kind of step back and be aware of like, what's that feeling? And we're going to talk about mindfulness and how that's important kind of when we get to some self-care conversation. So in order to diagnose a mental illness, we have criteria, and a lot of it depends on the length of time of the presence of symptoms, right? So if you're feeling sad, that's different than being diagnosed with depression, where you're having sadness over a period of 2 weeks, or lack of motivation, or problems sleeping, or problems eating, or isolating. Any of those kinds of things over a longer period of time could lead to a diagnosis. So we have to be aware these feelings aren't changing. Maybe I need to ask for help. Add to all of this, guys, that like not only are we dealing with kind of our regular everyday stressors and things that are challenging, but we're in a pandemic, which makes our normal outlets harder to access. And these feelings are going to be happening for everybody, medical illness, present or not. So we just have to kind of keep checking in with ourselves and asking ourselves this really important question, right? How are you? How am I doing? Connecting with other people, asking how they are doing, and really having a consistent check-in to see what's going on, because our feelings give us a ton of information. The National Institute of Mental Health reports that depression is the most commonly diagnosed mental illness amongst those who have chronic medical issues. So about a third of individuals with serious medical issues might be diagnosed with depression. And that could be caused by a myriad of things. We want to be really aware of what is happening and kind of ask for help when we need it, right? But it's not only the person who's diagnosed. We have to think about the impact of a chronic medical condition on the caregiver and on one's family, because there is trickle down on all areas. It's emotionally taxing for anybody. And we want to be able to support each other in the best way possible, right? So we know, right, if somebody's having to deal with medical care, and there's a lot of appointments and there are a lot of questions and there's a lot of weeding through the details to get to the right diagnosis, and all of those things can be incredibly overwhelming, can be super frustrating. You might feel like a rat in a maze. You hit a dead end, you got to back up, go a different direction. Eventually you might ultimately get to where we hope, right? Everybody's getting to where they need to go, but that could be a full-time job in and of itself. So self-care and things we need to be doing to focus on ourselves get lost in the process. So we really want to be able to stop and think about how are we taking care of ourselves, because taking care of your mental health is such an important protective factor for all of us. And community is a really, really great place to start. So we have to think about that. If we are spinning wheels, trying to get answers, trying to find out all this stuff, making all these things happen, we're going to feel stressed. And for some people, we might feel burnt out. So we want to think about, so if we go to this, our next slide, there's a true and false question for everybody. And I want to know, are stress and burnout synonymous? So do you think they're synonymous, true or false? And take a minute to kind of answer that. Excuse me. All right. So the answer to this, and you can answer it the same way, obviously, that you did. We can skip to the next slide on that one, but the way that we answered the one before. And here's the thing about stress and burnout: they are often used interchangeably. We kind of use them. I'm feeling so burnt out, when maybe we mean we're feeling really stressed. The truth is that they also, like everything else, exist on this continuum. And although they're used interchangeably, they are different. So let's really talk about the differences, because I do think it's important to highlight what those are. All right. So we all feel stress. Stress can also be for positive things or for negative things. If I'm planning a trip that I'm super excited about, but I have lots of things I have to do to make sure the trip happens, that's going to be stressful, right? But the thing about stress is it's usually temporary or tied to a particular event or normal part of life. So we feel stressed about planning a conference. We feel stressed about getting someplace on time. We feel stressed about making sure we get all of our appointments lined up. But it kind of there's our stress. So well done, folks. We understand that they are not synonymous, right? So that's great. So I'm glad that everybody can toss their answers in there. Thank you for that. Um, so stress really occurs when our mental, physical, and emotional reserves are being pushed past our comfort zone, right? If we were in our comfort zone, we'd be fine. We wouldn't be feeling stress, but we feel stress when we're pushed out of that. This is going to happen to many of us over and over in our lives, okay? Positive or negative, we're going to have stress. So the idea of here's the big way stress and burnout are different. Stress involves having too much of something, right? Too many pressures, too many demands, too much. It's too much, it's too much, it's too much. You believe that you're just going to have a really hard time getting it under control, and yet you believe that there will be growth and you will be able to navigate it. So stress is too much, right? It's feeling overextended, it's feeling too much. Burnout is the opposite. It's the response to like an extended period of stress, and it leaves us drained, detached, and feeling ineffective, right? So whereas stress is too much, burnout is not enough, right? It's kind of the depletion. It's feeling empty. It's feeling exhausted. It's feeling, for some of us, very hopeless. Um, it's feeling like nothing will change. And we use burnout a lot in terms of work. We think of work as a place we can find burnout pretty easily. The thing to remember is we can feel burnt out as parents. We can feel burnt out as caregivers. We can feel burnt out as friends. If we're feeling depleted, if the well is dry, we're feeling burnt out. And we have to be aware of kind of when that slippery slope starts, right? So again, stress is characterized by over engagement. You're doing too much. And burnout is kind of when we end up disengaging. So we just detach and we kind of pull away and we don't do enough. And maybe you're doing the bare minimum, but you're used to doing more. It's a matter of kind of figuring out, and that line is going to be different for everyone. Everyone on this call is going to have a different threshold for how much stress you can handle. And we're all going to have different levels of ability to handle stress in different areas of our life. So one of the things we also have to remember is just because you can handle it doesn't mean the person next to you can handle it. And that's okay too. All right. So once we start to feel like we're running on fumes, I can speak for myself. I have a really hard time being present for anything, anybody. I don't find enjoyment in things. And it's very easy to not recognize that you're feeling burnt out and then all of a sudden you're burnt out. So we want to start to be aware of like, how do we notice we're feeling more stressed? What are we being aware of? What's the limit? What's the boundary? How are we kind of recognizing this? Because burnout, a couple things happen out of burnout. It impacts our relationships with ourselves and others. It makes us more vulnerable to illness. So you ever notice when you're burnt out, you might feel more fatigued, more tired, you kind of get the sniffles, things just don't feel like they're working the way you'd like. That could be a sign of burnout. And it's not a mental illness, but it is a mental health issue, right? If we go back to this idea of we all have mental health and stress can make us feel exhausted and overwhelmed and frustrated and irritable and short tempered, it wouldn't come into a diagnostic category, but it is something we need to be paying attention to. Because if we don't pay attention to, it could tip us into a diagnosable depression or anxiety or something else. So we want to just be checking in on your stress levels. And we're going to talk about self-care because I think that's where we forget to do things a lot of the time. So I want to give you like a little science lesson, really quick and dirty science lesson about how our brain protects us. And that's where stress kind of comes from. But our brain's job in its most basic form is to protect us, right? Early on, cavemen, before they had higher levels of thinking, they saw a threat, saber-toothed tiger running towards them, threat, their brain activated, they went into survival mode and off they went and they ran and they found shelter and they protected themselves. Our brains continue to do that. And it's the most fundamental way our nervous system works. So there is a theory called the Polyvagal Theory, and it talks about we have two nervous systems kind of working in tangent. We have a parasympathetic nervous system and a sympathetic nervous system. Our parasympathetic nervous system is activated when you're calm. It's your rest and digest nervous system. When we are chill and we're connected and everything feels good, our parasympathetic nervous system is kicking. Then a threat comes and our sympathetic nervous system kicks into gear. And that is the system that is our fight, flight, freeze. And we could even add in there our kind of puff up, right? So what does that mean? Well, our sympathetic nervous system activates because we perceive a threat. I'm walking down the streets of New York and somebody's I'm not paying attention and a car honks at me. And my sympathetic nervous system is going to jump into gear. The first thing that all of us do is we freeze. It is almost undetectable when we freeze, but that moment of freeze is when we start to make a decision about what we're going to do. All right. So I freeze, and then my body stops walking because I know I just have to stop. Right. Or I scream at the person who honked at me. Right. I might get into fight mode. So fight or flight, we talk about fight or flight all the time. The key here is I have a threat, I freeze to make a decision, and then I have to determine, am I going to run towards the threat or am I going to run away from the threat? This happens outside of our consciousness. It just happens. And it's happening all the time. When we hit that question of what we're going to do, our adrenal glands activate, our cortisol levels, our adrenaline activates, everything kind of speeds up. And we notice it because what happens? Our hands sweat, our stomach is doing flips, our heart starts to race, our breathing starts to go up. Maybe we feel anxious, maybe we feel nervous, maybe we feel overwhelmed. And for some of us, the fight part comes in when we feel angry. We puff up and we fight, we jump in, we demand, we get into that space. And a lot of that is our sympathetic nervous system acting on our behalf. And that's its job, is it's to get us where we need to go. But how does this contribute to burnout? Well, for many of us, when we're living lives where we are on edge, where we're watching, where we're dealing with stress all the time, our sympathetic nervous system stays activated for long periods of time. It just keeps going and going and going. And what that does is it creates what's called adrenal fatigue. And it just like it's like the wood burning out in a fire. It just kind of like it goes down. It's still always like a little bit of an ember, but it's not as sharp and it's not as detailed as it used to be. And it leads to general fatigue, mental exhaustion. I know, being a psychologist in private practice, living my life, dealing with pandemic, dealing with other demands, there have been times where I am so tired and I'm like, why am I tired? I got 10 hours of sleep. I should be rested. And it's not physical, it's all emotional, and it's all stress related, and it's all feeling that kind of sense of being overwhelmed. And what happens, we get through that exhaustion because our parasympathetic nervous system kind of goes, hey body, you need to chill out, you need to calm down, we need to bring you under control. And in doing that, it makes us kind of crash, and it almost like shuts us down and protects us. And we need that too, because otherwise we keep going and we really would burn ourselves out. So that parasympathetic nervous system shutdown is really self-preserving. And we all need that to a certain degree, especially when we are dealing with such intensity of things in our lives, like chronic medical issues or family members that are dealing with that. And we're trying each way to turn to kind of make the best choices. So we're all going to experience this pattern. Some of us, again, more impacted than others. We don't always realize it's happening. Now that you're aware of it, you're going to be like, oh, I must be in fight or flight, or right? It happens all the time. We talk about it in big situations. How come that person can run towards the fire when everybody else runs away? We just have different levels of resilience and different things. So when we're thinking about, am I burnt out? What are some of the warning signs? Okay. Do you have less energy? Are you less efficient in your life? Are you not motivated? You just don't care, right? Are you making more mistakes? I know that's a big one for me. Am I feeling fatigued? Am I getting headaches, stomach aches? Physically, I'm just not feeling good. Am I really irritable? Am I just negative, like something that I used to love, I just don't love anymore? I'm not interested. Or maybe I'm having a lot of self-doubt. And self-doubt is an important one because that can really paralyze us from making important decisions when we need to make them. So we have to focus on self-care and kind of stress relief. We're going to talk about that, but we have another word cloud that I want everybody to think about. So we're going to go to that slide if we can, because one of the things we want to think about is who we are. We asked how you are, but at the same time, we want to identify who we are, because many of us get stuck in kind of one definition of ourselves. Like, I'm a person with HPP, or I'm a caregiver of a person with HPP, or I'm a psychologist, end of sentence. But if I had to stop and think about who I really am, there are many facets of me that might get ignored when I get only focused on one facet. So if you guys could use this and pick your top 3 to 5 things you would use to describe yourself and text that in, and we'll see kind of what comes up in that. I'll give everybody a minute or two to do that. Okay. So it's important for all of us to remember that we are more than just one thing. We are all a sum of many parts. And when we are stressed, it is easy to become hyper focused on the one thing that's causing us stress. So it's very easy to be all in about work or all in about caregiving or all in about an illness or all in, right? And one of the things that I say to my clients all the time is word choice is very important. So a, you might be a person with an illness, right? But you are not the illness, right? So especially when we think of feeling words, we use I am all the time, right? I am depressed, I am anxious, I am overwhelmed, I'm stressed. All right, awesome. So here we have a great word cloud of we're persons, we're a helper, we're moms, we're daughters, we're stressed, and it's going to keep changing as we get more things, right? But there's such diversity in that, right? There's not only one thing. And I bet if I gave you more time, you'd have more things that you could write in there, right? You're a guitarist, you're funny, there's so many things we could throw up there. So thank you guys for participating and keep adding them in if you have more to add in there. It's great to be able to see that there's more to us than one element. And we want to remember that all those elements make us interesting and make us kind of who we are. And when I talk to my clients and they're like, well, I'm depressed, and that becomes their identity that they hold on to, it's literally like they're looking through life through a cylinder, and they forget that there's much more about it, which is why this is an important exercise to think about for yourself. We are more than just what you see in that cylinder. If you look at life through a cylinder and then take the cylinder down, you see all of the pieces that you're missing. So we want to be able to recognize that life exists on many, many levels, and we are many, many elements of things. So keep thinking about what you are, and all the different, like, you are who you are to yourself, you are who you are in other relationships, you are who you are in how the world is, and then, you know, you're kind, you have an illness, you're funny, you're a guitarist, all the different things. The list can be endless. So I encourage you guys to keep thinking about who are you and how are you defining yourself, and don't limit what that could look like. All right. So the reason this is also important is because one important element of stress relief is to engage in things that bring you joy, right? To really engage in things that you like. And according to SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, they have identified that there are 8 dimensions of wellness, right? So the more balanced we are across those 8, the better, and the more balanced internally we are. So kind of in combination, these 8 make us whole, if you think about it. So what are those 8 things? We have an emotional dimension, an environmental dimension, a financial, intellectual, occupational, physical, social, and spiritual dimension. So think about that. You might be more tipped into one of those dimensions than the other dimensions. We all are at different times, but the hope is that we can kind of take from one box and put it into the other box and find as much balance as we can. The more balanced we are, the healthier we are. And I have yet to meet someone, including myself, who is like always balanced, but recognize times that maybe you feel more balanced than others. And then we want to try and recreate those times as much as we can. So stop and think about it, right? How balanced do you feeling, right? Is your emotional life overtaking you? Is your environment overtaking you? Are you really worried about finances? Like, if we're all tipped in one area, what's getting lost, and how do we build that area up for ourselves? Because we want to be as balanced and as healthy as we can. Excuse me. So now we get to self-care. We have to figure out, we want to find balance. We want to do this. All right, let's think about what self-care is. So we have one more poll question for everybody. So if we can throw that one up there, we have one self-care question for everybody we want to ask. All right, so we got to go back one. I think this is where we're going to text it again. Here is your question. So self-care is important because it can increase happiness. It can decrease physical health issues. It can help manage anxiety and depression. Who has time? And all of the above. Actually, the E is going to be A, B, and C. Not quite all of the above. I didn't proofread. I apologize. All right. So we're going to debunk a really important myth while you guys are finishing answering this question, and we'll put the answers up in a minute. Um, Self-care is not selfish. I'm going to repeat that again. Self-care is not selfish. Fundamentally, let's break down the word, right? There you go. So it is A through C, and we're going to address the who has time question, because you can always find the time. We're going to talk about that. I understand the issue there immensely. But here's the thing about self-care. It's not selfish. We need it. Break down the word, right? It's about caring for yourself. Many of us have been on airplanes. What do they say on the airplane? When the oxygen mask drops, make sure you put it on yourself first before helping anybody else. If you are not helping yourself, you ultimately will not be able to help anybody else, and you will burn out. I'm sure you've heard that 8 million times, and it's still like, okay, that sounds great. How the heck do I find the time? What am I trying to do? So remember, if self care can help you find more balance in those 8 areas and get to a healthier set point, good for everybody, really, really important for you. And what we've learned is it's not frivolous, and it can be very small, right? You do not have to give an hour for a massage or a half hour for a manicure. We hear about like that's self care, but I would say 5 minutes of sitting and really enjoying your favorite drink in the morning, like you love coffee. I happen to love a really good cup of coffee in the morning. Can you take 5 minutes to really sit, feel the heat of the cup, drink the coffee, taste the coffee, enjoy the coffee? 5 minutes. We all have 5 minutes. My brother has a fabulous saying that everything can wait 5 minutes. And I believe everybody can find 5 minutes. You just have to make it priority. So if you can take 4 different times of 5 minutes across the day to eat your favorite food, take a quick walk, have some quiet in the bathroom, whatever it might be, that's 5 minutes that you're giving to yourself to recharge. It's like plugging in your phone. It gives you the battery recharge that you need, and we all need that. It activates that parasympathetic nervous system we need to be working so desperately. It helps us get that back into a state of equilibrium. We want that to happen, right? What are the other benefits? It does decrease depression and anxiety. It helps us decrease stress. So maybe that 5 to 10 minutes of self care that you can do prevents you from hitting burnout, which is much harder to come back from, can help us with concentration, can decrease our frustration and our anger, help with happiness, help with energy, and improves our own physical health. So time, as some of you pointed out, is the biggest obstacle. So can we find 5 minutes, right? Can you find 3 different periods of 5 minutes over the course of the day and see what happens? So other things, and for those of you who are participated, we have kind of a cheat sheet that we're going to send out at the end, with the tips that I'm going to tell you now, so that you don't have to think about it so hard. We're going to provide those to you later, but I want to just go through this. That, as I mentioned already, first thing in self care is figuring out how to take care of yourself. Especially for caregivers, we are fabulous at taking care of other people. We need to make ourselves a priority. Ways to notice that maybe you aren't. Are you drinking more? Are you not exercising? Are you not eating well? Are you not really getting good sleep? Kind of fundamental, basic, like life skills. Are they not being taken care of? We've got to make those a priority. What boundaries are you potentially setting? Do you have some that you need to be setting, right? Do you need to set limits? Do you need to create some space? Do you need to say no to things? One of my favorite mantras is that no is a full sentence, and you are allowed to say no to take care of yourself when that is what's necessary. It may not please everybody, and that doesn't matter. Their opinion of you is not your business. You've got to do what you need to do for yourself. What are your expectations? Make those clear. Help people prioritize what they need to do. Ask for them to prioritize what you might need them to do, but make those expectations clear, and encourage people to follow through on them. As I said earlier, connection is key. It's a protective factor, super important, really necessary. This is a great way to do it. Keep connecting in whatever and however you can. Can you take a break? That 5 minutes might be necessary. Can you find it? Can you ask someone for help to help you take that break? And the last thing to remember is kind of everything starts with breath. So when you feel yourself racing, the first thing to do is stop, feel your feet on the ground, kind of get yourself into your body, and take some really solid deep breaths, because the breathing also activates what we need and activates our kind of parasympathetic nervous system, so we can slow down, make better decisions, not be impulsive, and really engage in the world that we need. So those, like self-care, we kind of came to it. There's all of this stuff that like increases our stress and increases our emotions and increases our reactivity. And the key is, how do we kind of notice that, breathe, do something for ourselves, and then re-engage in what we need to re-engage in. And that cycle may happen over and over and over again. But much of it, and there's lots of ways, I think, I've heard that you guys have learned about this and other things that people have talked about, stress balls, journaling, right? I kind of feel like so much starts internally, and whatever works for you, continue to do. We forget that things we love to do help us feel good, and we don't do those things when you're stressed. So if you're a music lover, put on music when you're stressed. If you love to bake and you can take 10 minutes and start something and then do it again throughout the course of the day, do that. But the things you love are often your best stress busters. We just forget that those are our stress busters when we're feeling really stressed. So I know I went over time, Deb, sorry. But
yeah, I can't. All right,
we can do some Q&A.
Yeah, we did get a couple questions. So, what I want to do first is I want to show the results of the first word cloud. So just to get a pulse,
I'd love to see that.
What everybody kind of was feeling. So let's just quickly take a look. We had a lot of responses.
Awesome.
But as we're pulling that up, one of the questions that came in was about children. A lot of people who are online are caregivers to children who have, chronic disease, HPP. And, some of the caregivers were asking, with children, how do you recognize stress and, more importantly, know when to get help?
It's a great question. First of all, can we just look at this feelings sound cloud? Word cloud. It's awesome. It's awesome.
A lot of people feeling overwhelmed, and we understand why, right?
Yeah. I think my word for 2020 is okay, right? Like sometimes I feel like that's the best I can do. And I think we get and I want to also highlight that there's some hopeful and joyful, we can't only, we have a continuum of emotions too. So we feel overwhelmed, but the way we know we're overwhelmed is we know what it feels like to feel calm. So kind of remembering that we need one, you can't feel awful without knowing what it feels like to feel good. So let's all remember that they all exist. But to go back, so this is great. And thank you guys for all sharing, because I love to see kind of what everybody's doing. And I encourage you every morning, check in with yourself in the morning, check in with yourself at night. But to go to the kids' question, as parents, even if you don't always feel this way, your kids really better than anybody. And so if your gut is saying something is off with my child, recognize that. And the most important question you can ask goes back to where we started our whole talk, which is, how are you? And really ask, but don't give them the answer, right? Hey, I know, but you could say, hey, I noticed you haven't been acting like yourself. How you doing? And they're going to say, fine. Or they're going to go, why are you asking me? Leave me alone, right? Whatever. So then your next kind of follow-up might be, here's what I'm observing. So go to your facts, go to what you're observing. Don't say, I don't know, you look like you're really upset to me, because now you've just shut down any communication. So the key is open-ended questions with as much opportunity for them to talk as possible. And it may mean it's a 3-part conversation. So you ask how they're doing, they say they're fine. It turns into a little bit of a struggle. You say, well, I'm here whenever you need me. Let me know when you want to talk. And then the next thing you know, they're kind of lurking around in the shadows. Put down whatever you're doing and try and talk to them, because that means they want to talk. But kids really aren't always so great at being like, hey, can we have a conversation?
Yeah.
So, right. I mean, you have kids. Yeah. And so I think that's it. And if your gut is still really feeling uncomfortable, find someone that they trust to have talk to them. Talk to a pediatrician or another trusted adult, anybody that you can kind of bring in to do a little digging. Can't hurt.
Okay, great. Another question that came in, given that we have a rare genetic disease and are often caregivers and affected ourselves, are there any special considerations for caregivers who are also experiencing stress about their own conditions while caring for children and other people affected by chronic disease?
It's, I think caregiving is probably the hardest job. And one of the things, just kind of as a side, that we've noticed in COVID is that the people experiencing the highest rates of depression and anxiety are unpaid caregivers, which are most parents and most people kind of around. So it's important to find the time for yourself. It is hard when you are a caregiver to feel that you are entitled to that, so to speak, and you are as entitled to that as anybody else. So caregive to yourself, right? Be kind to yourself, give yourself a break, find support groups, connect with other people, reach out to your own therapist if that's what you need. The good news coming out of COVID in some ways is therapy is more accessible because you don't have to get in a car and drive to it. Most people are doing it online. So there is access in ways we haven't had it before. Um, but make yourself as much a priority as the people for whom you are caring, because you are as much of a priority as they are.
And there's one other question I think is a really interesting one, and that's, how do you know, and how do you help somebody who you're caring for know that depression will end, or that dark period, that it's not forever? How can you give them, what kind of
Reassurance can you provide?
reassurance can you provide? Yeah.
That is okay. So there is the hardest question is that one, right? Because like anything, right? You might have some periods of depression your whole life, right? I like to liken mental health issues kind of like an ocean. And sometimes the waves are super tumultuous and you're the boat in the ocean and you're just like flailing all over and it's a mess. And then sometimes the ocean is very placid and very calm and very easy. And we don't know, right? So some of the most validating things you can say is, hey, we don't really know what's going to happen, and I'm here for you regardless of anything that's going on. And so you can validate, because there's no way to predict, give it 3 weeks and you'll feel better, try this. There's just no way to predict the answer to that. So I think it comes from, let's validate like crazy. It's really hard, it's scary, I'm in it with you, I'm here for you, I'm a place of support, I'm a touch point for you whenever you need, and let's see what happens. And you're going to have good days and bad days, and we're all going to have good days and bad days, and we'll work through those together. And I think that's really the best reassurance you can kind of give anybody, because you don't want to give false promises, because we just don't know.
Yeah. All right, we're going to do one more question and then we'll go to our
Okay.
breakout groups. How can we best communicate to health providers that HPP affects us mentally? Because, I think that, is there a way that we can communicate this? Because it seems like a lot of times they think that doctors don't like to be told what to do. So I
Yes.
think that, how can we do it in a way that we're not offending them and having us feel like they're ignorant? Is there a way, being a doctor yourself, that, we can communicate as a patient in a way that they'll hear us?
It really, I think doctors like to stay in their lane. And unfortunately, mental health still gets short shrift according, from other things. But I think the key in it is, hey, I haven't been feeling right emotionally. I can recognize that this could have something to do with my physical or my child's physical or whoever's physical. I still need some help. What do you recommend? Like, don't be afraid to be. I'm sure everyone on this call has learned to be an amazing advocate. Don't be afraid to also advocate for your own mental health. I'm just not feeling right. I'm feeling off. I'm feeling unmotivated. Can you recommend someone for me to go talk to? Like, just continue to advocate, because people do, they like, this is my lane. I stay in, I can tell you for my own job, there are certain times like I stay in my lane. I don't want to go over there. This is what my area of expertise is. I'm not stepping on toes, but someone needs to get to this lane. So they might have to ask me who to go to that's in this lane. So don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. If you know that you're not feeling right, ask and demand. And I'm sure everyone on this call is some sort of advocate already in that way.
Yeah. Well, this is awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Jen.
Thank you for having me, everybody.
I learned a lot, and Jen has also sent us over a tip sheet that we're going to share after the webinar that has some great tools and tricks for people to manage their mental health. So